African Socialist International sent this letter to the government and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela the day after Hugo Chavez passed away. And it reads, "Please, to the people and government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, please accept our profound and sincere condolences for the loss of Comrade Hugo Chavez. Comrade Chavez was beloved by millions of oppressed people throughout the world who, like the poor, workers, and patriots of Venezuela, valued his bold leadership in the struggle against U.S. and world imperialism. Compañeros and compañeras, this message is to confirm the solidarity of the African Socialist International with the people of Venezuela during this difficult time in the struggle against U.S. and world imperialism. The African Socialist International is a revolutionary party of African socialists that is committed to the struggle for a liberated, unified, and socialist Africa and African people throughout the world. Our unity with the people of Venezuela and the Bolivarian project remains unflinching. We recognize that the imperialist vultures will look upon Comrade Chavez's death as an opportunity to sow mischief. They will escalate their attempts to disrupt the Bolivarian project that he initiated and that has already changed the character of South American politics and the relationship between the U.S. and those it has historically oppressed in the region. Compañeras and compañeros, our commitment to the liberation and unification of Africa and African people does not blind us to the fact that we are also part of the revolution of the Americas, and that the Bolivarian project is also our project. We realize that all the efforts of the enemies of the people and government of Venezuela are doomed to fail, that the U.S. and others are attempting to defend a social system whose future is being determined by the efforts of the oppressed of the world to retrieve our resources and birthrights from the clutches of a decrepit and dying social system that was born at our expense. It has been efforts like the Bolivarian project initiated by President Chavez that is responsible for the crisis that the imperialist system is experiencing worldwide. The U.S. imperialists and the counter-revolutionary traitors in Venezuela are mistaken in their belief that the revolutionary trajectory of the oppressed can be reversed by the death of Comandante Chavez. The African Socialist International understands Comrade Chavez to have been an instrument of the same historical process that is propelling to victory the peoples of Afghanistan, Palestine, Iraq, and Iran, along with those of us in Africa, South America, the Caribbean, and within the very bowels of Europe and North America. Although we also mourn the death of Comandante Chavez, we, like you, exult in the certainty that his presence with us on this earth is but a prediction of the forthcoming victory of socialism and the emancipation of the struggling, oppressed masses of the world. We are reminded of the words of another revolutionary who, like Comrade Chavez, dared to join the struggle for the emancipation of humanity from the death grip of imperialism. Quote, "Whenever death may surprise us, let it be welcome if our battle cry has reached even one receptive ear and another hand reaches out to take up our arms," unquote. As Comandante Chavez answered this call after the death of Che Guevara, we too do so upon the death of Comandante Chavez. Hasta la victoria, siempre we will win. So, we think that obviously it's important to do more than simply talk about Hugo Chavez the man. His story is one that resonates with a lot of oppressed people around the world in terms of born to simple people who may be considered upper working class or lower middle class, school teachers and things like that, who actually was a person who wanted to be a baseball player. He thought he would be a professional baseball player. But the only place that he could get an opportunity to play ball and to actually perfect his skill was in the military. So he joined the army at 17, something like 17. He join the army. And it was through being in the army that he had an opportunity to experience some what people might call left politics or progressive politics in Peru for one place and some other places. And he was impressed by that. He got an opportunity to travel around in Venezuela and experience the poverty and oppression of the people there. Chavez himself, it's really important to note, is of African indigenous stock. That in Venezuela, like all of South America and like all of the world, is dominated, has been dominated by a white elite. And this is one of the unspoken contradictions throughout South America. In South America, while people engaged in what was supposed to be a struggle for independence, they fought or they won their independence from France, or they won their independence from places like Portugal. In the case of Brazil, the reality is that the ones who were doing the winning of the independence were the white people who, like those who came here to the United States and stole the Indian land and brought African people here to enslave us. Then they fought against the British to take all of the loot as opposed to sharing it with the British that was supposed to have been the mother country. So you had these white colonists who came here. They celebrate every year Independence Day, etc. But this was independence for a group of white thugs who stole all of the loot that was supposed to simply be going primarily to England. They wanted it all for themselves, and so they made a revolution to keep it. And it was they who engaged in slavery, who furthered the interests of slavery containing Africans and the indigenous people on these concentration camps that they call reservations today. Same thing happened throughout South America, where people supposedly won their independence from Spain or from Portugal, etc. So it was the white people who won their independence. And the indigenous people, the poorest people in South America, are the indigenous people and the Africans. And if you go any place in South America, what you will find is that the ruling class has historically been white, or they have been mestizo, mixed with white people, while the so-called peasants have been the indigenous people who live, like in the countryside and what have you. And of course, the Africans who were catching hell on the bottom of the social ladder as well. So that's part of what makes Chavez so important, because he is hated and despised. Even in Panama, when we look at the man in Panama who the U.S. went in and overthrew because they supposedly hate drug pushing or they, etc., Noriega, he also was indigenous and African stock, and that was one of the reasons he was hated so much by the elite in Panama, and who participated in helping him to be overthrown, just as this elite in Venezuela hates Chavez. But it's not their hatred that I'm concerned with. The reality is that the significance of Chavez, as is the significance of Evo Morales in Bolivia, is that you're talking about indigenous people now engaged in a process to take back their resources, take back their land. Regardless of how they may be perceiving what it is that they're involved in, historically what we're seeing is rectifying this relationship that Europe and Europeans have with the rest of us. This is the objective reality of their presence here, and this is one of the reasons we think Chavez is so important, because he was able to acknowledge himself that one of the reasons he's so hated by the elite in Venezuela is because he's black and Indian, and they are white, and because of the philosophy of imperialism, of capitalism, the underpinning, the ideological underpinning has always been white supremacy, what people refer to as racism. So that's one of the reasons that Chavez is important, because it marks a turning point, a historical turning point. And Evo Morales is important because it marks a historical turning point. And because we have seen glimpses of certain kind of struggle in places like Peru that mobilized the indigenous populations in terms of the Tupamaros. We've seen glimpses of this with the Zapatistas and others, like in Mexico with indigenous people moving to try to assert themselves into history by objectively rectifying this relationship that we have with Europe and Europeans around the world. That's one of the reasons that what Chavez did was so important. Now, there are some really important issues here. We have seen how people are able to recognize that Chavez did some great things. He halved the poverty rate in Venezuela. That is to say that there are half as many people who are impoverished in Venezuela as a consequence of his coming to power. He used the people's resources in terms of oil, which they now say is the largest known oil reserve in the world, is right there in Venezuela. I say largest known, I don't believe that's true. I think the CIA and other entities know where oil is, and I think there's more than what's there in Venezuela. I think that you can hardly dig a hole in Africa without coming up with oil, and I think there's oil in other places. But there is a reason to control this market of oil, the price of oil, and it's a strategic question for them as well. But Venezuela is recognized as a place right now that has the largest known reserve of oil. And I wanted to make this point because there's some of us who remember when the U.S. first went into Somalia. We discovered that despite the fact that they were on some humanitarian mission, that people who were associated with George Herbert Walker Bush had purchased almost half of Somalia, that they had discovered a valley of oil under Somalia reaching all the way over to Yemen. So that's a huge, they don't talk about that. So I don't know what that means in terms of the known oil reserves in the world. They don't even mention that anymore when they talk about Somalia. Nobody talks about oil in Somalia. You know, they're just going there now to deal with so-called pirates. And they're not talking about themselves when they talk about pirates. They're not looking in a mirror. They're talking about the people who are defending themselves from the pirates, who are declared to be the pirates. But here's the discussion that we see happening. That people, as a consequence of Chavez coming to power, and he did not come to power through a revolution. You know that. The first time that he tried to come to power was through a coup attempt. I think that might have been in, 92? Something around that period. He was impressed. He organized what he thought were progressive military forces to try and overthrow the Venezuelan government. And that didn't work. And he was jailed along with some others who were involved in that process. I think it was in 1994 that they were freed, and they were freed because they messed up and allowed Chavez, when he was on trial, to talk. And his presentation was televised. And he admitted to their attempt to change the government. He said it's failed for now. And that for now is something that resonated throughout the population of the impoverished people in Venezuela. So he became this extraordinarily popular force even while he was in jail. And so it became necessary in 1994 for them to free Chavez. And then shortly after that, Chavez was able to run for office, run for the presidency, and he won an election. He's been there for something like 14 years. So he won an election with 63% of the vote, a huge majority that he was able to win by. And he began to take custody of the resources of Venezuela and try to divert the use of these resources to the masses of people in Venezuela. He also engaged in an open struggle and criticism of the relationship that Venezuela and South America had with the United States government, with the empire as it's characterized. Chavez identified with Simon Bolivar, who was somebody who in the 19th century tried to lead a revolution to emancipate, to unite and liberate all of South America. That's what Chavez is seen as a part of his project. Not just Venezuela, but a Bolivarian project that will unite South America into one whole that could result in the emancipation of the people. In that sense, that it's not different from things that we saw with people like Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, who was it was basically a bourgeois, democratic, national kind of revolution. They weren't talking about making socialist revolution. They were talking about taking power, and they were offended and insulted, as oppressed people everywhere have been insulted, by the domination of their country and their resources by these alien external forces, imperialist forces that control their lives and control their resources. They were militarized. They were made militant and radicalized by this, and their opposition expressed itself, and NASA took power and tried to make some changes, and even united in the project with people like Nkrumah to try to build a united Africa. And then further than that, they participated in building NASA, Nkrumah, and some others in the non-aligned movement, the NAM, non-aligned movement, that was saying, we're not part of this thing that y'all got going with the Soviet Union. We're not part of this thing y'all got with the capitalist West. We're going to go our own way and try to develop our own economy and our own freedom, you know, etc. So we had these kind of bourgeois democratic efforts, and they were really important efforts that were made and challenged imperialism, so that we found the imperialists fighting furiously to undermine the non-aligned movement. Not because they thought it was a socialist movement, but it was because they didn't control it. Being non-aligned meant they didn't control it. And so that was a real problem for them. They weren't the only ones with problems with it. For different times, the Soviet Union had a problem with it. They didn't control it either. It was non-aligned and a bourgeois, like I said, radical democratic project that was trying to speak to the interests of the people without being involved in this contest that was going on between the Soviet Union and the United States and the other imperialist powers. So here you have Chavez, who is a popular democratic force, who wants to utilize the resources of Venezuela for the people in Venezuela, who wants to break the stranglehold that the U.S. has on all of South America and engages in projects and processes to do that, who ended the isolation of Cuba, which was extremely important because Cuba had been targeted by the imperialists who had invaded it on one occasion, had occupied Cuba for the longest period of time, and taken Cuba as a prize in the so-called Spanish-American War, and who still occupy part of Cuban territory in Guantanamo Bay, where they've taken the people that they imprison and torture in the so-called war against terror, which is a war against any of the whole U.S. European empire. So that was really important to end the isolation of Cuba, because there are people here who can remember that recognizing that Fidel Castro was mortal, like everybody else, the imperialists were actually having verbal, demonstrative celebrations, if you will, about the obvious aging of Fidel Castro, and then Castro dies. We're all making plans about how we're going to run the country after he dies and what we're going to do, etc. That was how the imperialists were gloating, you know, in the media, etc. And then especially, you know, as you know, when Fidel fell ill, quote unquote, fell ill and disappeared, there was just every other day we were seeing reports that Fidel was dead or dying. And so it was this relationship that was established by Hugo Chavez with the Cuban government, the Cuban Revolution of Fidel Castro, that ended the isolation of Cuba. And that was important because, as you know, Cuba had relied on Soviet Union for material support. And then when the Soviet Union imploded, when it no longer continued to exist, that was a severe hardship on Cuba and the Cuban people, and there's a whole question of how Cuba was going to survive out there. And then of course, what we saw was that not only did Fidel not die on time, but the reality is that Fidelismo had been expanded beyond Cuba and had reached to Venezuela, and that offered new kinds of possibilities for a revolutionary project. That's not a small thing. I'm told that when the U.S. government, you know, the United States quickly recognized as people the generals who overthrew Chavez, and in 2011, I think it was, 2002. 2002. 2002. You know, they were the first to say, yeah, we recognize the coup makers, etc., because they had a role in it. They have a role and had a role in all of the military forces that you find throughout South America. They have been trained in United States military forces, whether in Fort Benning, Georgia, or someplace like that, or Panama, and various other places where the U.S. has been training and nurturing and raising up the military in all of these countries like they're doing in Africa right now, today. So that was, so they participated in overthrowing Chavez, and I'm told that, that while they had Chavez in detention, it was Fidel on the phone with those military officers and generals, you know, really criticizing them and you know, you pigs, you betrayed the people of South America, the revolution, etc. I mean, really, and the people were out on the street in one ear, and Fidel was on the phone in the other ear. And so that had played a big role in forcing the generals to free Chavez, and which is why I think that the deep bond even got deeper. As you know, Cuba sent more than 20,000 doctors, or at least 20,000 doctors, from Cuba into Venezuela. That's how they were able to give free health care to the people in Venezuela, because there were doctors on all these communities who were serving the people. And so you got these kinds of efforts. You got in Venezuela the attempt to house everybody, to give everybody housing in Venezuela. You've got medical services available all over in the poorest communities in Venezuela. As you do in Cuba, you've got these kinds of efforts on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you've got the U.S., you've got the imperialists who are demonizing Cuba, demonizing Castro, demonizing Venezuela under the leadership of Hugo Chavez. And when you look at this country where there are 50 million people who don't have health care, there are more people without health care in this country. There are something like what, maybe 4 times as many people without health care in the United States than there are people in Cuba. You know, I mean, so that's like a statement about the significance of the kind of work that the revolution has provided in Cuba and what it's been trying to do in Venezuela. But you can't say, can you say then that that socialism existed in Venezuela? No. There was no socialism in Venezuela. There's been no socialism anywhere on earth, as quiet as it's kept. And it's one of the reasons I'm offended when people want to attack Venezuela for not having true socialism, like they can find some place on the earth where there has been true socialism. And I say this without trying to involve myself in some kind of sectarian struggle between Trotskyites and Stalinites and, you know, the whole bit, anything like that. I do agree with Karl Marx when he talked about how capitalism rested. Everywhere, world capitalism, as it came into the world, rested upon the foundation of slavery and colonialism. And the fact is that all capitalism, the beneficiaries of capitalism in the world have been in the white world. They've been in Europe. They've been in what we call North America. They're in Australia, places like that where land has been stolen again from indigenous peoples and occupied by those who left Europe. And why did they leave Europe? Because of conditions in Europe, which were not as wonderful as we are being led to believe in a post-Exodus kind of situation. So they left Europe and went to all of these other places, and then and capitalism was built off of the slavery. Listen, when Geronimo and the Apaches were fighting against the white settlers in this country, that was anti-capitalist struggle. When Toussaint and Dessalines rose up in Haiti to fight against the French, that was anti-capitalist struggle that was going on. When Nat Turner said, "Strike at night and spare no one," in 1831 in this country, that was anti-capitalist struggle. The reality is that capitalism itself was born off of slavery, stealing this land. That this land that we call the United States, without this, can there be a capitalist United States if the Indians hadn't been massacred and been in these concentration camps today? If half of Mexico hadn't been stolen, that we call California, Texas, Utah, all these other places, this is the birth of capitalism. Again, Jesus didn't come back while you were sleeping and then gave all of this to the white people and to Europe and gave all the wealth that's there. There is a process through which it was all accumulated. Marx called it a primitive accumulation of capital. That was not the starting point of capitalist production, that was not a product or consequence of capitalist production, but was a starting point. My enslavement, the creation of Venezuela itself, was no such thing as Venezuela before Europe attacked Africa and began to trade in black people and began to take over all these lands and countries and the indigenous people themselves. This is what gave rise to capitalism. So Marx said that, and he said, after saying that, it becomes clear that what we have now when we look at so-called Marxist laws that people characterize as Marxist law having to do with the social development, it becomes clear that you cannot be talking about ending this capitalism by simply seeing some kind of contest between the white workers, the industrialized workers, and the industrialized ruling class that rests upon this foundation of slavery and colonialism. If you get rid of capitalism in the real world, then what has to happen is the foundation has to be destroyed. It's like the joke you hear about people who are changing the seating arrangements on the Titanic. You know, you've got this thing that's now involved in severe crisis. And you've got a debate and argument that's going on between Marxists and so-called Marxists and capitalists about how to fix it. And they're arguing about how to salvage the seating arrangements on the Titanic. The damn thing is crashing, it's going down. And all of Europe has benefited from this attack on Africa, on the indigenous peoples, etc. And that's where we got to get to understand what is happening in the world today. And that's why we say socialism has existed any place. And this is really important for us to understand, because what we've seen is not socialism in practice. We've seen the conditions or the historical basis for the rise of socialism. What we've seen is the political conditions for socialists to seize power. There are people who really believed in socialism. Lenin. You won't find somebody who believed in socialism as much as Lenin believed in socialism, was impatient about having to go through what the Marxists had said had to be necessary before capitalism could actually be disappeared, before socialism could come. They said they can't have socialism until what? Until capitalism has exercised and actually developed and gone through this process of development. You can't have socialism before that. And Lenin said, okay, I hear you, but I'm taking power anyway, right? And he was a socialist. And in many ways, there was not a fundamental difference. There was not a profoundly fundamental difference in the way Chavez came to power and the way Lenin came to power. Not fundamentally, except, well, there was a difference in the sense that, that Chavez came to power through the electoral process. He got elected through that process, and which is problematic, as you know, because we saw the same thing happen in Chile, didn't we? With Pinochet, a socialist Allende gets elected. Pinochet is the one who was the tool of the imperialists who end up killing Allende. But Allende comes to power as a socialist and could not hear that it won't work like that. First of all, you can't have a real socialism according to all the advice that people were giving him from the so-called left without first destroying the capitalist state. You got to destroy the capitalist state. What is the state? What is the state? What is the state? The military, the police, the organizations, the whole apparatus of oppression that's in the hands of the ruling class. You can't have a socialism with that in place, because you can go to power. If you don't control the gun, the ones who got the gun will control you. And that's what happened, of course, in Chile. And they killed Allende at Kissinger and Nixon and the rest of them, dirty, filthy capitalist pigs who work for slumlords, who work for the stockbrokers, who work for the bankers and things like that, that people are claiming that they're opposed to now as a part of the newly enlarged 99%, right? Those are the people who engaged in destroying that revolution. So they said you can't do it as long as the state is there, and that's true. The difference I was inferring to, however, was that when the Bolsheviks came to power, their significance was having organized a tightly organized, relatively well-disciplined ideological force that took advantage of the crisis of imperialism as it manifests itself in Russia. And it came down, I mean, it has been fictionalized since then how the Bolsheviks came to power, but the people took the power, and the Bolsheviks, because they were best organized, most disciplined, had an idea where the hell they wanted to go, was able to march in and actually capture power, help to destroy the state apparatus and create another state that served the interests of the people. That's the fundamental point that I wanted to make. But the real point is that socialism, this was socialists taking power. Then they soon after coming to power, none of what was supposed to happen in the socialist situation was able to happen in Russia. None of it was able to happen. Immediately they did try to have the workers they destroyed ranks in the military. No ranks anymore. They moved the old leadership that was tied to the aristocracy from the officers in the armies, in military, etc. They turned the factories over to the workers, who you didn't have these bosses and administrators there anymore. And then what happened? A part of what happened was they was encircled. They were invaded by imperialist countries, including the United States. The petty bourgeois forces who had all the skills and everything did everything they could to disrupt production. The workers didn't have the skills and didn't have the level of cultural development to be able to run the factories and things like that. And capitalism was international. It was world capitalism. It wasn't like Russia. If Russia was there by itself, it could have made it. But it wasn't there by itself. So all the imperialists around the world were engaged in disrupting this revolutionary process, and the capitalist system was a world system. It wasn't just a Russian system. If it had been a Russian system, it wouldn't have mattered that the workers didn't have all those skills, because they would have had the time to make it happen. But it was an international, part of an international system. So the international bourgeoisie was able to encircle Russia, to keep it out from participating in the international, in the world economy, etc., and starve it out. So they had to revert to what Lenin called the new economic policy, which was putting rank back in the military, because they had to fight those who were invading them on a regular basis. They had to go ahead and bring back the specialists and managers who were in the factories and everything, who knew how to make it happen. They reverted in many ways to what I think Lenin himself called to a form of state capitalism, because the actual objective conditions for socialism, the historical basis for the rise of socialism had not yet existed. And if you didn't have it in Russia, where the hell did you have it? If the Soviet Union wasn't it, what was it? So we saw the whole debate that Trotsky became involved in, because Trotsky, after Lenin died, was one who was opposed, and I'm mentioning Trotsky on purpose because there are some left Trotskyites, white Trotskyites, who are most vehement in their condemnation of, not condemnation, but their critique and criticism of Chavez, and they criticize, Cuba, and not without some foundation. I mean, it was not a socialist state, but neither was what Trotsky helped to create, a socialist state. And in fact, the whole notion of permanent revolution that Trotsky put forward, he had to put it forward in defense of having captured power before there was even capitalism had even developed in Russia. Permanent revolution, yes, let's take power, and it's not like we're going to make like a socialist revolution. There's a permanent revolution that we engage in. So even if we take power where capitalism is not fully developed, then we engage in a permanent revolution. That was Trotsky's position, Trotsky's contribution. It may turn out to be important, a concept that he put forward. But the point is, there was no socialism in Russia or the Soviet Union. They did some magnificent changes there, though. Would you say the Russian Revolution shouldn't have happened? I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think there was really progress, human progress made as a consequence of that revolutionary project. And look at China. China taught us so many things, but in order for China to teach us this thing, had to violate many of the what had been recognized at the point as the Marxist precepts. Now you're not talking about the working class taking power. How the working class going to take power when the only place in the world the industrial working class existed was in the white world, in Europe and North America? So if you don't have any workers, what are the Chinese supposed to do then? Try to get a job with a British firm? what are they supposed to do in the interim? Can the socialists not seize power? Should the socialists not seize power? Of course they should seize power. And when doing so, it made a big difference in the lives of the people, and it was filled with contradictions. But the most important contradiction that we have to remember is China, like Russia, all encircled and kept out of the world economy so that they could do the same kinds of things there that Europe and Europeans and North Americans were doing as a consequence of being able to steal all this loot that was coming to them from the oppressed peoples around the world. That's really important for us to understand. And Cuba, you know, the magnificent revolutionary project of Cuba, just a handful of people. Socialists take power in Cuba and run into the same kinds of contradictions and had to rely on the Soviet Union, which for a while was able to provide a lot of aid to Cuba, but after the Soviet Union collapsed, of course, we saw a retrenchment. And even now, the Cuban Revolution is trying to find ways to have some form of capitalist enterprise in Cuba to maintain the process. They almost had another revolution in Soviet Union in something like 1920s, maybe in the 1920s. They almost had a socialist revolution they were trying to have because of opposition to the new economic program that was put forth by Lenin and was being pushed by Stalin, where thousands of peasants who lost their land and caught hell and were actually killed in the process of trying to collectivize the land holdings of the peasantry. All of these are contradictions that they face at being encircled by capitalism because the objective conditions for the rise, the historical basis for the rise of socialism did not exist. But what we've been seeing over a period of time, and especially since the Second Imperialist War, is that the ground has been shaking as being reshaped. And one of the major turning points of that, in my estimation, was Vietnam. Where a real revolutionary war, where the whole people were mobilized in this struggle against imperialism and U.S. imperialism, and it excited masses of people all around the world. And so Vietnam, and then, you know, we've seen subsequent to that, you know, struggle happening all around the world. And some of this struggle is not being made by socialists, but it's being made by forces who are changing the relationships, the parasitic relationship, the purely parasitic relationship that exists between world capitalism under the hegemony of the U.S. and Europe and the oppressed and colonized peoples around the world. That's why we salute Iran, not because we think there's going to be a socialist outcome there. In fact, in the short term, they're really important. In the long term, the Iranian Revolution may turn out to be something else. If history should remain stagnant, if other kinds of things don't unfold in the world. That's why we salute Afghanistan, not because we think that some Afghan Muslim is going to lead to some kind of fundamental social transformation in Afghanistan, but because all of them are involved in undermining this pedestal, this foundation that the whole capitalist system sets on. So this is part of the discussion that we're having that most of the so-called European and North American Marxists don't get, and they can't get it because they don't understand that this is the foundation, because of this Eurocentric notion of history and their place in the world. They can't understand that they have been given birth by colonialism, by the theft of resources, human and material, lands from the oppressed peoples around the world. They don't need, for them, their explanation for why most of the world lives off less than $10 a day is the same as the bourgeoisie. They don't have a fundamental difference. And the reason I say it's the same, because otherwise they would understand that if the majority of the people on earth are living, 80% of the people on earth living off $10 a day or less, half the people on earth living off $2.75 a day. That is the reality for most of the people. Then something peculiar is happening with white people in ancient genius. Something peculiar is happening with Europe. And that is because capitalism itself has come about and benefited this handful of the population as a consequence of stealing all these resources from the majority of the people. This parasitic relationship that starves and oppresses the rest of us for the benefit of this small group. And so this is why Chavez is important. Not because he's brought socialism. Socialism is going to come. But Chavez has been a part of the process. I like the fact that he reintroduced the notion of socialism again. It becomes a popular concept. Well, if people think they're fighting for socialism, let's work at helping to define what the hell socialism is. There are people who want to say that Obama is a socialist. You understand? And of course, nothing could be further from the truth than that. But we want people to engage in the discussion of socialism. And we think that it was really important for what Chavez has done with the project, and people can fight against the attempts to take that away from them, and in the process of doing that, they will be fighting for the socialism that Chavez promised them. I think that's an important milestone in the historical development of the struggle here. We know that in the final analysis, the socialism is when the workers have power, not when there's a great leader who bestows housing and food and education on the masses, but when the masses have control of their own resources, the way they tried to do in Russia. The managers now are lost and the workers run the factories. If there is a military at all, then the people are the military. That's the kind of stuff. Also, I want to say that Chavez, I don't know much about Chavez. I can't say much about the structures of that revolutionary project, but I have been able to read some things that I think is really important. I just want to share this with you. I've been told I've got 3 minutes left. That I think is really important. And this was something that was put forward by the Telegraph, the Daily Telegraph out of London, England, in describing some things about Venezuela. This is on August 2012. They said, the headline, Venezuela plans a 1 million-strong guerrilla army against U.S. invasion. It says, the subhead, Venezuela is training a guerrilla army aiming to be 1 million strong by 2013 to fight off a possible U.S. invasion. An opposition MP says. It says that apparently crafted with input from close ally and fellow U.S. foe Cuba, it's called Plan Sucre. It's sweet, isn't it? It's sugar plan. Apparently crafted with input from close ally and fellow U.S. foe Cuba, covers the legal, logistical, and other angles necessary to transform a professional army into a guerrilla army. Representative Maria Corina Machado told El Universal newspaper. The former president candidate says she had obtained a copy of the plan printed by an institution affiliated with the National Army. The strategic objective is to build a new Bolivarian military doctrine that will prepare Venezuela to be successful in a prolonged popular war against the empire or the United States, Machado says, citing the document. This is clearly a proposal with Cuban inspiration and advice. She said the military plan also provides for strengthening the guerrilla force at the expense of the regular army. That's really important. The plan calls for strengthening the territorial militias in order to ensure the necessary strength for the overall defense of the nation, targeting recruitment levels of 1 million by 2013 and 2 million by 2019, Machado said, citing the document. Venezuela's militia corps, described by firebrand leftist President Hugo Chavez as an army of the public, was created in 2005 to protect the country against possible imperialist aggression. They are considered a part of the military, what report directly to the president. Chavez, and anyway, I just wanted to say that because the state is the question that we're looking at. And so we're looking at possible transition that was in place in Venezuela to begin creating another, if you will, power that could contend with the state that he inherited. And I've read in a popular newspaper online within the last 3 or 4 days that people were commenting on how these young people were running around with guns, and they had set up in their communities, and they said they had to protect the revolutionary armed to the teeth. So hopefully what that means is that something has been put in place, because what they're going to have to fight is U.S. imperialism is going to come primarily or initially in the form of the domestic forces that are there, that could also include military or sections of the military, police, etc. But if there's another state apparatus being created, then perhaps there's a greater future, a more prolonged future for the specific project that's happening in Venezuela. There are contradictions in Venezuela that we are recognized and we have struggled with. When we were there, you saw Diop, who said everything. I thought that was a great presentation that Comrade Diop made there. I thought that was, I like this brother here. This brother is bold. He go right up in there and say it, and you could tell how the translator, the translator is educated, they don't take us seriously, Comrade Diop, but the people do. The people do, they know everything because they've read Marx and Engels, and they say nothing about Uhuru and Israel and stuff like that, so you can't know what the hell you're talking about, right? But I thought that was a really powerful presentation that you made. I don't know if I've seen that before, but I was really impressed by that. I've seen you do that kind of thing before, and I think it was really important and really good. We don't like some things. We heard complaints when we were there by some people who were saying that they had problems because Chavez was not protecting the African communities from police violence and stuff like that in Venezuela, and that's a problem. We've heard problems, similar problems in Cuba, about the state of the African people there, but in terms of a general trajectory, this progressive kind of trajectory, and we think that with this process in motion, that we are on a place where we'll deal with these other kinds of contradictions that we are talking about, because we're going to build this revolutionary project throughout the world. Uhuru. So, we just want to say, how do we say that? We say, hasta la victoria, siempre.
Uhuru. Sure, Chairman.
I just wanted to say this. We talked about Hugo Chavez and the Venezuelan project and how that, in many ways, the contradictions in Venezuela are universal. When you're talking about the struggle for socialism, we don't have much industry in most of the colonized world that has been kept off the grid purposely so that we can always remain a dependent population, even though much of the resources, human and material, come from our places. But if we could use the resources, if we had industry, then we'd be using them for ourselves, and they wouldn't be coming, to Steve Jobs and Apple and stuff like that. You'd have them. It makes a lot of sense to me that if coltan is so important to computers, etc., that you'd have a lot more computers in Congo if it were free, and a lot more innovation and what have you on the continent of Africa than you do anyplace else. So it means that the revolutionary projects go through different situations. It's not like the workers directly seize power, seize control of an economy that has already been developed to its fullest. And it means that you have a situation where comrades like Hugo Chavez would seize power in Venezuela, and similar things happen in other places with much worse outcomes than what we saw with Venezuela. And one of the things about NPDUM's work is that it is the party's strategy to lead the revolutionary national democratic revolution, which is what Chavez is trying to do, which is what happened in many other places where the economy has not developed to a point where it really is something that the workers can directly seize power. There's a whole process of development that has to occur. But this time, through NPDUM, the development happens under the leadership of a revolutionary socialist organization, but it's a mass revolutionary national democratic process that will bring all kinds of people into the process. Revolutionary national democratic forces who, from the petty bourgeoisie, who from different sectors of the economy and of the society itself. But it's given a revolutionary character because it's under the leadership of the party, under the leadership of the revolution. we move forward recognizing that that is what has to happen, because again, the economy isn't developed to a point where the workers can simply walk in and seize control of a developed economic apparatus like they could if they, say, in Berlin or in the United States used to be the case. So we take control of what there is, and we do a revolutionary national democratic process and project, and NPDOM becomes the popular instrument through which the people can capture power under the leadership of the African working class. So I just wanted to say that. Uhuru. Yeah. James. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah.
I appreciate the clarification. Can you, if you could clarify something for me,
Are we broadcasting? No. Are we not broadcasting? We are broadcasting. So yeah, Jamie, you need to speak to the mic, I guess. Yeah, wherever, here or wherever it is. Up here. Up here. Yeah, yeah.
Uhuru, thank you. I guess my question regarded the preconditions for socialism that you mentioned not existing, and if you could just give me some clarity on what you meant about socialism not existing anywhere in the world today. Why is it the standard Marxist explanation of capitalist nations needing to develop to a certain point, or is it the question of the colonized challenging imperialism and capitalism at the point of production that's the precondition for socialism that you mentioned? Thank you.
I think we unite with the assumption that socialism is that point in time where the working class becomes the ruling class, that it's not just a matter of people doing good things and bestowing upon the workers good housing and benefits. For example, Libya, Gaddafi did, some great things in improving the standard of life of the people there, but it was the people were not in power. And we're not looking for a benevolent, a force that will provide resources. And I've seen, like, when I was in Azania at one juncture, I don't know if it's still the case, the program of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania had to do with something like really providing a certain kind of welfare state for the workers. Well, the workers don't need welfare. The workers need control of their own apparatus, the state itself and the economy itself. So when we talk about the socialism, we're talking about the socialism is that juncture where the workers becomes the state. The workers really become the state, and the workers also have control of the instruments of production. As they tried to do in Russia immediately after the revolution, that the workers, actually run the factories, and just think about what a difference it would be. We've seen, like in certain places in the recent period where so many people, miners have died in these terrible calamities in the mines, etc. But just think if the workers were themselves in charge of the mining, that the likelihood of people going into those situations where there's no safety or anything like that. I mean, the profit wouldn't be the driving force. The conditions of the workers, people would be the thing that would make a decision whether I go in that hole or not. And the workers would have something to say about that, and not some boss who's looking at the bottom line and profits and things like that. So we see the workers actually in charge of the whole process of production and control of the state itself. And you get the bourgeoisie, the logic of capitalism is that workers won't work unless there's some actual incentive, and they have to face starvation, or they won't go to work, or they won't, etc. And actually, I believe that's absolutely insane, that people do want to eat and do want to live well, etc. And I think the production process in the hands of the worker would have a much better outcome. Cancers and things like that, if the healthcare thing were not motivated by profit, then there's a profit in cancer. You can't cure cancer because it's profitable. As long as people got cancer, people are going to always be spending huge amounts of money for pharmaceuticals and other things like that. So the workers in power would make a fundamental difference there. And Cuba comes, it seems to me from what I've read about Cuba, it comes closer to trying to do some of these things that we're talking about, but it's not the workers in power. And when we say, we're talking about the historical conditions, the Marxists put forth the premise that I think that that there's this process of historical process that societies go through, and they move, like I said, from capitalism, and then there's communism. After capitalism, communism, and socialism, using traditional Marxist definition, and I like this definition, all right. Socialism is the early stages of communism, at which time the workers, have become the state, and they make the state redundant over a period of time. The state becomes redundant because the workers and production, the capacity to produce, has been enhanced to such an extent. So part of what I'm talking about is that Marx, said that capitalism itself, as a social system, required as a pedestal, the enslavement of the masses of people around the world. We know from our own investigation that capitalism and colonialism are what gave birth that slavery and colonialism are what gave birth to capitalism, that it rests upon this foundation. We know that the reason that the capitalist crisis is happening now is because there is a real struggle among people and countries to take back their resources, and so this leads to undermining of the whole capitalist system. So we say that the precondition for the rise of socialism in the real world is the end of the parasitic relationship that the capitalist beneficiaries have to the colonial peoples of the world. And central to that, we believe, is the African Revolution. Not from some, self-centered notion, but because of the historical role that Africa played in the creation of capitalism, African slavery, and colonialism, and the dispersal of African people and our location in all these various places around the world, that Marx said that made capitalism possible, because the capitalists had to have possession of tremendous amounts of labor and resources in order to grow capitalism. That's how capitalism got here. It rests upon this foundation, and we believe that we have entered upon the eve of the historical basis. We have reached a place where the historical basis for the advent of socialism is upon us. And that's what this shifting in the world means, the center of gravity in the whole world means. That's what Afghanistan, all these other places mean. It doesn't mean that they are socialists doing these things, but it means that capitalism is being deprived of its lifeblood. And it is the responsibility of socialists and revolutionaries like ourselves to arm the masses of African workers and poor peasants to actually seize power and become this new ruling class, so that we can build the kind of world that we're looking for. And let me say one other thing about that. Because you can't build socialism in one country. I don't give a damn what anybody says. You can't have a one-country socialism. All the world is going to be capitalist except you. And you got a world economy, and you're going to exist in that world economy as a socialist island. It won't work. You need those other kinds of relationships. And what we're saying is that this has been a contradiction. The Russians were faced with it. Lenin, looking for revolution, said, well, revolution's got to be happening. Germany is going to be revolution. Hungary is going to be revolution. That's the thing that's going to rescue. He said it's going to rescue the Soviet experience. Is a revolution going to happen in all these other places in Europe, but it didn't happen. And it came close. The revolution came close in Hungary, for example, but it was put down, etc. And then what happened was that Lenin and the Bolsheviks had to revert to some of the capitalist kinds of practices in order to stave off defeat and the overthrow of that whole regime. So right now, that's what makes Chavez so important. Chavez is important. Look at little tiny Cuba. Tiny Cuba was important not because they had achieved communism or because they had actually acquired the socialist state. They were important because what they did was expose the relationship between the workers and the working people and the bourgeoisie. This was an example that cannot be tolerated, just like Haiti could not be tolerated when it first became independent. This island of workers, black workers who had seized control of their own regime, etc., couldn't be tolerated. Cuba is hated because the notion of the working people being in charge of their own affairs, the notion of, you got a country where just workers are running the country, that at least is a theory. Of course, the apparatus, because of how we are surrounded, apparatus has achieved in Cuba, just like it did in the Soviet Union, a tremendous kind of significance. I think it's more democratized in Cuba than it ever could have been in the Soviet Union, but you still have that kind of contradiction. I don't know if did I address it at all?
Oh, beautiful.
Splendid. All right, good.
From off the internet.
Okay.
You answer that as you spoke.
Okay. This is a question from Comrade Marcus. The difference between socialism and communism. When does socialism end and communism start? When do you have the end of socialism? And the notion is, and it's a good question too, one thing that makes this so important for us is that, you have this capitalism benefit and capitalism itself emerging as a world economy that primarily benefits just a minority of the human planet, people on the planet. At first, the beneficiaries of capitalism was relatively narrow in Europe even, which is what gave rise to the demand for socialism and things like that in Europe. But as capitalism consolidated itself as a world system at the expense of Africa and other places, then it was able to open up to the workers in Europe. When Cecil Rhodes, Lenin quotes him in Imperialism, the highest stages of capitalism, Cecil Rhodes walking through London, and the masses were rising up, wanting to burn everything down, make revolution. And he's quoted as saying that I was walking through London and people were demanding bread, and it came clear to me at that point that if we're going to save England, then we had to become imperialists. And imperialism was actually a conscious policy of how to advance the interests of Europe and white people. And there was no pretension of it was white people at the time that this happened. Even the Jewish state of Israel is this was the model. This is how you project yourself. That's what the guy out of Belgium, what was his name? King Leopold. They put Belgium, make Belgium out there. In order to do it, you got to be imperial. You got to have empire. You got to have imperialist resources. So that was the way that people moved forward. So you got this very limited sector of the population that opened up to allow the European workers and other people to participate in it. The average European worker, American worker, lives much better, much better than the upper class in Africa and other places like that. So they are counter-revolutionary just based on what benefits they get from this process. And when they talk about becoming part of the 99%, it's because part of the benefits that they've been getting from the rest of the people have somehow been threatened. And what they want is those benefits back. They don't want the overturn of this goddamn relationship, because that would be killing the goose that laid the golden egg. Is that how it goes? Isn't that the thing about a so the point I wanted to make is that there's this ridiculous competition all the time for productivity, that's based on profit, that's based on even intra-imperialist competition with each other, who's going to control what markets and things like that. It leads to wars and just terrible kinds of things. And I don't think development necessarily, I don't think that paved world necessarily represents development. I don't think that it is necessary to kill, like the ozone and all of this other stuff. I don't think that's necessarily consistent with development. I think that's consistent with capitalism and production for profit. I think that it is possible to have development and with even unpaved roads. Can you believe that? Unpaved roads and it's just a lot of changes that people do not equate necessarily with development, because development has been, your sugar is development. You know what I mean? It's all those things that cause death and destruction because of this plenty, this cornucopia of resources that you got to find something to do with all this stuff that's coming from every place around the world. And my contention is that you can have development that is not based on some kind of vertical process. You understand, where hierarchical, where people get better off than other people, and that there can be a kind of development where people can live good lives, etc. And I'm mentioning this because the question about socialism and communism is one of the reasons we're having this discussion is because the Marxists, Marx, as you know, I didn't intend to go here, but can I have just a couple more minutes? I know, are we still broadcasting? Okay, I can have just a couple more minutes. Because, as you know, Marx talked about socialism or communism coming about as a consequence of a certain kind of development of capitalism itself. Capitalism develops to this great thing. There's plenty for everybody, except when he says everybody, he's talking about Europe. I mean, let's be clear on this. I'm not even making a criticism of Marx. I'm just saying that this is a fact. This is how he understood things. And the Marx who was talking about this development he wrote it in a book, thousands and thousands of pages that were, came to be known as Capital in its various volumes, that was paid for with money that was slaves did. I mean, Engels' father, who owned textile mills that came from cotton that Africans picked, and Marx did this writing about that. He didn't see the slave, except, in some kind of peripheral way, not as central to, even though he defined it as a central question, he didn't treat it as a central question as he moved forward. So for them, development meant all of these factories and all of this other stuff happening. And this is how, what's interesting about it is that he starts off talking about a communism that comes before this kind of communism. Do you know that? He called it what? Primitive communism. Where he said there was no exploitation, there was no class exploitation, no oppression of women or anything like that. It was primitive communism. And he made the assumption, without evidence, that it was something that was universal to the development of human society, but the only evidence they provided for this primitive communism was not in Europe. It was the Iroquois Indians right here. It was a study that had been done by a man named Morgan, who was an American, anthropologist. And I think he saw some other societies where you didn't have that. And we know from our own experiences as Africans that much of this non-antagonistic class-type relationships did not exist for us. So we had what was the communism that Marx talked about, except it wasn't developed. And when does it become developed? When it goes through this process that Europe gets involved and you have all this industry and all this other stuff. Now, before then, Europe is at best a footnote in history. What thrust Europe so profoundly into history was slavery and colonialism. This is the advent of white power in the world with the rest of us. So it was the destruction of primitive communism, if you will, that created the process for the primitive communism that was enjoyed by the Indians and the Africans and many others, that created the process that would give rise to the real McCoy communism that would come as a consequence of the development of the society at our expense in Europe and North America. I don't know if that made any sense or not. Can you work with that? Okay. I think it's important. And but it's tied to cars, like automobiles everywhere, and it's tied to all kinds of things that's not necessarily for a good life. It becomes associated in our brains with having a good life. And if you got 2 cars, and if you can, everything is paved and what have you, but you can cure disease, you can get rid of all kinds of problems in society, and people can be neighbors and have decent relationships and enough food to eat and plenty, etc., and children who don't go to school and kill every goddamn body. All this stuff without having this other thing. In fact, I think that precondition for those kinds of contradictions is the kind of economy based on slavery, colonialism, and profit, right? And profit. So we want to have a forward-looking scientific society, but we want to free science from the grasp of the barbarians, the capitalist beasts, who would take science and use it to imprison humanity as opposed to free humanity from labor, and you can't free humanity from labor because so much of what capitalism is about requires the theft of labor power, right? But the workers, don't you know that I know that it's untrue that this white man created the cotton gin? Ain't no damn white man sitting up someplace, creating no cotton gin, something that make picking cotton easy. That white man over there, let's see, how do we make this easy? Hell no. It's some African who did that because the African is the one who had to do the work. And I'm saying that there's so much out there that we have a stake in solving these problems, but we can't solve them because the imposition of capitalism through colonial and empire, on us. So I agree that we talk about communism. That's what we are. Communists, rabid communists, reds to the max, red, black, and green to the bone. Unlike anything that Lenin could have ever imagined, that Marx would have nightmares if he knew what we had in store in terms of the reality that has to be created. Where the workers who produce value actually control the value, and not just in some tiny enclave, but collectively all around the world we have to come together and produce, and it is we who should be the ones who are making the decisions about what happens to this value and what kind of society that we're going to live in. And that we believe that's possible, and that's what we're fighting for. And we want to grow a serious hatred of the bourgeoisie among the people. We want the people to hate the bourgeoisie and their hangers-on, and those who come into our community spreading superstitions and stuff like that to keep us confused about our reality. Talking to us, about some religions and some other kind of nonsense that would befog our brains so that we cannot come into contact with our own genius and our own capacity. That somehow the humans can't do it, that something out of space, whether on some kind of damn mothership or is in control of everything. The people are central, and we have to help the people come into contact with their own capacity, their own genius. That's what this revolution is about. And ain't no white man, and none of that stuff is that which should determine the fate of the people. The people, once coming into contact with our own capacity, can do anything and will do anything. That's the communism that we're looking for. And then what happens is that as we socialists who are in power, that's what the party is about. Is we want to capture power. We want to organize masses of people to participate in the revolution, to take power, so that we can then kick out the bourgeoisie, so that we can put them on trial and put them in jail, so that we can remove them from places of power, remove their influence, take their newspapers away from them, make them have to get jobs just like every damn body else, has to work for a living, give them the same chances and conditions that everybody else got. Where becoming a part of the bourgeoisie becomes something that people frown on. If they know that, oh, you used to run what? You understand? People will look, negatively at that. That's nothing to brag about. These Negroes and people who we know brag about they got this or they was, oh yeah, what's your name? What's your address? Those are we want people to look, in disgust at these politicians, all of these politicians who are running around saying that this is the only way you can solve the problem by trying to keep us locked into a system that steals our resources and steals the resources of the people of the world. We want people to hate a slimy traitor like Barack Hussein Obama, who's using technology, so-called science, to murder people all around the planet and doing this with his black face and black skin. And then using that, he doesn't claim to be a part of us, but he uses it as an identification thing that allows people to think that he's a part of us. We need to denounce him seriously. We want people to have a real, genuine hatred of our class traitors as well as the national oppressors. The class, the bourgeoisie, people should look at them and despise them and recognize what role they play in history. And I just think that's, we want to make that kind of revolution, and the people can be the power. Once the people understand who the enemy is, you ain't going to be able to stop them. You think them little drive-by shootings that you see happen that accidentally shoot the little girl and all that stuff is a problem? Wait till they understand who the real enemy is, and then you're going to see some drive-bys unlike anything you've ever seen before. They're going to make Dorner look like a Boy Scout. You know, the people will take the power, and that's what we have to promote. And we have to give the people the ability. We have to provide the kind of leadership so that people will be able to have a mechanism through which they can exercise their will. Uhuru.